The Death Grand Alliance has a bit of a bad rep when it comes to the different kinds of allies that you can field for your warbands. It doesn't have some of the more straightforward pieces of Grand Alliance destruction, and it doesn't have the raw power of pieces like the Fulmoroid Crusher or the speed and the damage of the Varangard that Chaos have. Neither does it have the kind of action economy and action cheating that we can expect out of Grand Alliance Order. So, what do those allies have? What kinds of things can you bring in your games? This is what we're going to be exploring today. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a slightly better idea as to what kind of allies you should be looking for in your Death Warbands and what options are out there for you to choose, which will allow you to fit in any kind of tactical niche that you're looking for. Before we get into that, though, please, as always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to throw some more support my way, you can join me here on YouTube. You can join me on Patreon. Alternatively, you can join me on Streamlabs. You'll be able to see things like behind the scenes content, videos in advance of when they come out, and you'll have a little bit of a say into the kind of things that I do in the future. But anyway, that's enough for that. Let's get on to the allies. So as I looked at before, we're going to start with the available damage dealers for Death. And one of the big problems with Death is that it doesn't have this really deep pool of available damage dealers that you can call upon. The faction itself is actually pretty small. It's only really Soulblight Gravelords, Flesh Eater Courts, Nighthaunt, Ossiarch Bone Reapers, and then a couple of additional bespoke warbands like the Askagan Trueblades and the Beast Flayers. And because of that, the depth isn't really there, but that doesn't mean the Order doesn't have a number of pieces that you can use if you're specifically looking for damage. And the three fighters I've got here kind of give you a few different options. Two of them that kind of fit together are the Wielder of the Blade and the Askagan Exemplar. The Wielder of the Blade comes from the Nighthaunt Warhammer Underworlds box, the Headsman's Curse, and you can see the stats here: 2536, movement 6, defense 4, 20 wounds. It does have the fly remark, which is really, really good. Alternatively, we can look at the Exemplar, a little bit more expensive than the Wielder of the Blade. It's got 3 attacks, strength 6, 4/6 damage profile. That's awesome. The thing is, when you're looking at the Wielder of the Blade, I would urge you not to think of it as a 175-point model. I would urge you to think of it as a 200-point model because we're always going to give it the Divine Blessing of +1 attack. That gives it a 3/5/3/6 damage profile, which is very good. And that, when combined with its fly and its high movement, allows it to get to where it needs to on the board and really bring its force to bear. On top of that, it comes with a bunch of other abilities. Being a Nighthaunt hero, it gets Resurrect, which is very good. It will allow you to bring your dead fighters back into action for them to use on subsequent turns. Being part of the Headsman's Curse, it also has a free move that it can use as long as that move goes towards the closest visible enemy fighter, which is fantastic, especially in trying to get it into combat more quickly. And also, being part of the Headsman's Curse, it also has a pseudo net ability that will allow it to slow down enemy fighters that it does come in contact with. So overall, I think Wielder of the Blade at 200 points is probably one of the premier pieces for you. That's not to say that the Exemplar is bad. It is still pretty good. It does have higher strength and it's got higher base damage, and there is something to be said for that. It's just that the Exemplar doesn't really have that depth of ability that the Wielder of the Blade does. That being said, what the Wielder of the Blade does have is that it's got the good old, if I kill a guy, I get a free move or a free attack. So that will get it more action economy when it does start swinging. And when it's balling into things like, let's say, 8 to 10 wound chaff models that it can kill in one hit, you can suddenly get it rolling fairly quickly. The last thing I wanted to show is the Varghulf Courtier. It took a big hit between its previous incarnation and the new incarnation that's just been released recently in the new Flesh Eater Courts update. That being said, I still think it is quite useful. 4 attacks, a strength 5 with a 3/5 damage profile is always going to be good. 35 wounds is fantastic. It'll keep it around for most of the game, so you don't really need to worry about that toughness 4. It does also have movement 8. It lost its fly, but the movement 8 and the weirdly shaped base that it has, I think give it a little bit more utility on the battlefield as opposed to just, I'm going to jump to places. Finally, the Varghulf does have a very interesting ability whereby it can use a double to ignore the vertical distance between it and its opponent if it's attacking. So if things are up on the big old gnarl trees, for example, they might be 5, they might be 6 inches up in the air, the Varghulf can go in underneath it, use that double, and then attack normally. So yeah, I think that the Vargulf overall is still a decent shot, especially if you just wanted a very straightforward damage dealer, a big old Titan style piece to run in and to eat things. If you wanted to give the Vargulf Divine Blessings, I'm not entirely sure that would be a great idea. It costs 300 points already, but if you wanted to boost its damage, you could probably look at either giving it an extra point of attack, which would make it a 5-5-3-5, which is great. An extra point of base damage might be pretty good to make it a 4-5-4-5, which is also real good. Alternatively, I quite like putting +1 toughness onto the Vargulf. Making it toughness 5 means that those 35 wounds stretch out so much further, and on top of that, the toughness 5 is a little bit cheaper than the rest of the blessings that we're looking at. So I think that's something for us to do. Looking at the base damage of these fighters, you can see that the Vargulf Courtier 8.83 average damage, so it can run in and it can kill 8 wound chaff on 1 attack action, which is fantastic. The Escagan Exemplar, it's going to be winning everything on 3s most of the time anyway, thanks to its base strength of 6, which is real good, and that's 9 points of damage, which is awesome. And alternatively, you've got that +1 attack wield of the blade. It's doing a little bit less damage, and it is a little bit more difficult for it to wound things, only having strength 5 over strength 6, but still overall, the damage is very admirable, and it gets that free move to be able to get into the fight, and it gets the resurrect, and it gets the net. So overall, I would go, if I had to choose one of these, it would probably be the wielder of the blade, just for my general games. Alternatively, the Vargulf Courtier, if I had the ability to bring a lot of chaff units just to back it up. Especially to Courts, their update gave us a bunch of decent utility characters, actually, with some very interesting abilities that I think are something almost unique to the Death Grand Alliance as it is. There aren't really that many instances of these kind of abilities turning up. The first fighter I'd like to talk about is a Marascroll Herald. It's 155 points, 18 wounds, toughness 4, very good, movement 5, so it can basically keep up with most things that you will be running. A 3-4-2-4 damage profile. It's okay, not fantastic. It does have range 2, which keeps it in the fight a little bit longer, but what we're bringing it for is its King's Entreaty triple. And this reads, pick a visible enemy fighter within 3 inches. That enemy fighter player must accept an infected bone. And if they accept it until the end of the battle, after that fighter activates, you roll a dice. On a 5 or more, that fighter dies. And if they reject the infected bone until the end of the battle, that fighter cannot use abilities. So this is a really good way to shut down your opponent's key combo pieces. Something like Calthea Zandire, for example, who your opponent will be throwing their triples into to get those extra dice off. Run the Marascroll Herald up to her, offer her the bone. Either she's going to risk dying every time she activates, or she's basically going to have her abilities turned off. This is real good because it also affects the generic abilities like Rush and Onslaught, so you won't be able to be using any of those. You can use it on things like Brute Bosses to turn off Umessin. You can use it on things like Karajan Overlord's characters to turn off Fight for Profit. It's very good, it's very versatile, and yeah, I'm pretty glad that Death has access to this, because due to the fact that they don't have this massive wealth of allies, I think having interesting abilities on the allies that they can take is something that's very good for them. Alternatively, I want to talk about the Abhorrent Cardinal, 130 points, a little bit cheaper. Again, movement 5, toughness 4, 18 wounds, which is very good. 3-3-2-3 damage profile, it's okay, not fantastic. But it does have the double speak in tongues. So you pick an enemy fighter within 3 inches, you roll a dice. On a 3 or 4, that fighter makes 1 less action in their activation to a minimum of 1. Death doesn't really have access to a lot of nets. It's basically a couple of Nighthorn characters, and that's where they're getting their nets from. But the Abhorrent Cardinal gives you a pseudo net style ability, which I think is far stronger. I've been using abilities like this with Hunters of Huanchi and their Hurled Bolus, and suddenly when you get within range of an enemy fighter, you use Speak in Tongues on them, and then it works. They're down to 1 activation. Because it does have that 3-inch range, most of the time you will be pretty safe from whatever fighter it is you are running into, and then that fighter has to make a choice. He says, okay, I have 1 action in my activation, and that's basically going to be a move, because otherwise I'm kind of sitting here unless I've got a ranged attack. So yeah, I think that the Cardinal, along with the Marascroll Herald, they give you some very interesting utility pieces for your Death Warbands that you otherwise wouldn't have available to you. Now, one thing that Death does have that a lot of other Grand Alliances don't is free access to teleports. And there are 2 main sources of teleport in the Grand Alliance. One is the Nighthorn Dreadblade Harrow, and the other one is the Abhorrent Gore Warden. The Dreadblade Harrow, 235 points, so it's not super expensive, but it's not very cheap either. A 4-4-2-4 damage profile, which is okay. But look at that. Fly, movement 10, and 25 wounds make it one of the fastest fighters in the game for getting in there, taking out opponent key pieces. And on top of that, I said it had a teleport, and it does. On a triple, you get to remove it from the battlefield, and then you get to place it anywhere else on the battlefield more than 5 inches away from enemy fighters. That teleport, along with the high movement, what it allows you to do, if you are playing a treasure mission, a Dreadblade Harrow will basically win it for you. You can teleport onto a piece of treasure, you can move past the treasure, you'll go down to movement 8, then you go 8-8, and then just get out of the way of anything, and you will have that treasure. Alternatively, really far-reaching objectives, it can either use its massive fly movement of 10 to go 20 inches across the board on a double move, or it can just teleport there. So yeah, I think it's very good. Dreadblade Harrow is definitely one of the options that saw a lot of play earlier in the game when the Death Grand Alliance wasn't so fleshed out. Nowadays, what you can bring is the Abhorrent Gore Warden, 225 points, so a little bit cheaper than the Dreadblade Harrow. Again, with movement 10, it's only got toughness 3 this time, so it's very much a glass cannon, exactly the same damage profile, 4424, and only with 20 wounds. Now, the Abhorrent Gore Warden's teleport, unlike the Dreadblade Harrow, is on a double instead of a triple, and also what it allows the Gore Warden to do is take someone with him. So the Gore Warden, when it teleports, it can pick another friendly fighter within range of 12 wounds or less, and then that fighter is going to teleport along, and then they will be deployed when the Gore Warden deploys, with the caveat that both of your pieces has to be more than 5 inches away from your opponent. This potentially gives some very interesting play in objective missions again, because what you can do is you can have the Gore Warden can activate for a double into his teleport, bring a guy with him onto an objective, and the Gore Warden can use his massive move of 10 inches to move onto another objective, and you basically get 2-for-1 objective control there. Alternatively, if you happen to have any 12 wound or less fighty pieces that really want to be in combat, the Gore Warden can bring them with him, teleport. That fighter still gets to move, so it'll be able to move and then attack, especially if it's got something like a free move that might be very useful for it. And then the Gore Warden can go off and do what it wants to do. Now, it does have that toughness 3, and it's only got 20 wounds, which is a bit of a bummer, actually. So when we're talking about Divine Blessings, maybe on the Gore Warden, you want to think about a point of toughness to bring it up to toughness 4. Suddenly it makes it very respectable. Alternatively, if you just wanted to go full blast cannon route, that move of 10 and the teleport will allow it to get a move attack on basically anything in the game. So maybe you want to look at +1 base damage, make it a 4-4-3-4. That's also another option. Dreadblade Harrow, I would say that it doesn't actually need Divine Blessings, but if I was going to give it one, I would maybe look at something like +1 base damage again, or possibly +1 attack to give it that little bit more oomph in combat so that it can really knock out those key pieces that it's going to be hunting. Next up, we have my absolute favorite Nighthaunt ally. It is the Briar Queen. She comes in the Thorns of the Briar Queen set, and she is the hero from that set. She costs 200 points, and what do you get? Movement 5, so a little bit slower than most Nighthaunt nowadays, but she gets toughness 5, which is very good, makes her extremely tanky, and she gets 22 wounds, which for other Nighthaunt heroes of her price bracket has a lot more survivability built in. In combat, she's not fantastic. A 3-3-1-4 damage profile, it's not all that great. Her ranged attack is pretty good. 3-9 is the range. 2 shots at strength 3 with a 2-5 damage profile. I like getting that up to strength 4 using Divine Blessings, because then suddenly she's able to reliably put damage onto weaker chaff units and try and knock them out from range, which is something that the Death Grand Alliance doesn't really have available to them. And her 2 abilities of note, one of them is going to be Spectral Summon. Because she is a Nighthaunt character, she gets to use that. I've talked a little bit about this before, but essentially what you'll be doing, picking a friendly fighter that's already been taken down, you get to set it up on a platform or on the floor wholly within 3 inches of the Briar Queen, and that fighter set up on the battlefield no longer counts as being taken down. We're going to be removing a number of damage points allocated to the fighter equal to the value of this ability. So if you have a 666, you can bring a guy back, he'll come back with 6 wounds. If you have a 444, bring a guy back, come back with 4 wounds. It's one of the main strengths that Nighthaunt heroes bring to the table, the ability to bring back your fighters. Now, as of the errata and the FAQ, those fighters will not be able to do anything on the turn that they came back, but they'll be able to activate and be able to be used normally on subsequent turns. Something to note, though, is that those fighters can still have abilities used on them, and they can still use free activations that those abilities might give. Famously, what I've been able to do in my games, if you ever get that turn where you roll 2 triples, what you can do is you can activate the Briar Queen or any other Nighthaunt hero, you can use your Spectral Summon to bring a guy back, you can wait, and then when you activate again, you can Spectral Summon again to bring a second guy back. I've used that with very good effect on the last turn of several objective missions. It effectively allows you to trade up 3 for 1 on any objective that you go onto, as long as you have the 2 triples available to you. Alternatively, what the Bright Queen has is probably my favorite ability that she has access to is Howling Vortex. What we're going to be doing is picking a visible enemy fighter within 9 inches, roll a number of dice equal to the value of the ability. For each 4 or more, you're going to allocate 3 damage points to that fighter, and in addition, for each 4 or more, you're going to subtract 1 from the move characteristic of that fighter until the end of the battle round. So in terms of its damage, it's got the same single target damage as a Horns of Hashut Flamethrower, which is really, really good. If you're rolling 4 or 5 dice into this, you can regularly expect to do something like 6 or even 9 damage, which is awesome. And for each success, you're going to be stripping +1 move out of those fighters. I've used this to reduce Mega Bosses down to movement 1. I've used this to reduce Kurnoth Huntmasters down to movement 1. It's real strong. It's a very good control piece. And that's why in the 200-point range, when you're really looking at either the Askagan Exemplar, the Briar Queen, or the +1 attack Wielder of the Blade, I like to bring the Briar Queen most of the time. Very powerful Bladeborn units, which really allow basically any faction within the Grand Alliance to put decent and solid chaff units on the battlefield. The first one is the Sons of Velmorn. You have to bring King Morlach, he's 160 points, but then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be bringing Thane, Marshal Falk, and Helmar the Hewer. They're all Graveguard. You're going to be paying 70, 65, and 60 points for them respectively, and they come with all the bonuses that Graveguard have. King Morlach, being a death character, can use the Resurrect ability on his minions, and you can bring back Helmar, Falk, and Thane. The amazing thing about that, though, is that they do not have the elite rune mark, so whenever you bring any of these 3 fighters back, they're going to be coming back with their full complement of wounds, which is really, really good for subsequent turns. And on top of that, they get all of the bonuses for just being Soulblight Gravelords. So the minion fighters will get free moves if they're within range of Soulblight Gravelord heroes, and all 3 of these Graveguard have their own arguably better version of Onslaught, which gives them more attacks as long as one of the other Graveguard have fought. So yeah, I think between the 3 of them and King Morlach, who actually makes a decent secondary damage dealer, he's not super expensive, toughness 5 is nice, 25 wounds is nice, a 4-4-2-5 damage profile is nice. Yeah, I think they're really, really good, and if you are looking for those extra fighters in your warband, you can basically look at the Sons of Velmorn, and they will do everything that you want and probably more. Next up, we have Daintalos. Daintalos is the leader of the Exiled Dead. Daintalos has gun, basically. Look at that range attack. 7-inch maximum range, 2 shots, strength 6 with a 3-6 damage profile. That is amazing. If Daintalos ever gets to sit still and shoot at a thing, he's going to be regularly doing anywhere between 9 and 12 damage at something just out of the dice that he's going to be pushing out. I've used Daintalos to kill enemy chaff. Usually he's MVP in every single game that I have to put him in. And then on top of that, if someone does try and charge him, he's hitting back with 4-4-2-4, which is your average decent hero damage profile. He's toughness 4, he's 25 wounds, which makes him really tanky, and he's 210 points. So Daintalos is great. Now, what else are you bringing him for? You're bringing him for his electric zombies. You've got Ion, Bolt, Flash, and Coil. 3 of them are 60 points. Coil is 70 points. But what are you buying for those points? You're getting zombies. You would think, oh, zombies aren't that good. These guys are good. They have a spear damage profile, so they're looking at 3 attacks at strength 3, 1, 4. Coil gets an extra point of strength, so he goes up to strength 4, doing 1-4 damage, which is awesome. And then on top of that, they're zombies, so they get 10 wounds, but they get movement 4, unlike normal zombies who get movement 3, which is a massive boost when playing your games. They have an additional ability, Crackling Arcs, that they have available. It's basically a double, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be picking an enemy fighter within 3 inches, you're going to be rolling a number of dice equal to the value of that double, and then for each 5+, you're going to be doing a number of damage equal to the amount of your electric zombies within 3 inches of the target. So if you get all 4 of them and you're rolling a double 6, you roll 6 dice. For each 5+, you're going to be doing 4 damage, which is really, really good. Overall, they are cheaper than the fighters that you'll be bringing out, the Sons of Velmorn. Daintalos costs a little bit more, but if I were pushed to choose between the 2, I would pick Daintalos and his zombies, because that gun is really, really powerful. There are a couple more members of Daintalos' crew. There is Regulus, who is basically a 45-point skeleton if you need even more cheap chaff. And then there is Prentice Markov. I don't like to bring Markov because he doesn't really have the rune marks that I like. He doesn't get to do the electric zombie stuff, but Regulus is a fine addition if you just need those extra models. I hope this has given you some ideas as to the different kinds of allies you can use for your death warbands. These are basically the best of the bunch. Of course, we've got new things coming out like the Pyregeists. Their hero might be good, it might not be good. Time will really tell if we want to ally something like that in. But this is really what you're going to be looking at as a start. I think overall, if I was hard pressed to choose one hero out of all of these, I would probably go for the Briar Queen, just because for me, she has that mix of survivability, ranged ability, and a decent couple of triples that you can really use. If I wanted a lot of chaff, again, I go with Dying to Loss, I'd go with his electric zombies. I think they're really good. But yeah, that's it. That's it for me for today. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know down in the comment section below the death allies that you like to take. I'd like to really hear your thoughts on the selection of allies that I've got going for you here today. That would be really good. If you have any interesting death builds with some interesting allies, I'd also like to see that. Or if you think I'm crazy and everything that I put forward to you is absolute garbage, again, let me know. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Itan, this has been Off Musings, and I will see you next time.